Hey friends, it's Blake with Birthing Babies. I am here launching a brand new podcast, Birthing Babies for Birth Workers. A lot of times it's exciting when we have a passion, but we're trying to get all of the pieces together to get that passion off the ground and let it become a business. And so I am here to help doula you through your birth business. I am here to coach you, to give you the support, to give you the real world advice, answer the questions you might have, the ones you didn't know you had, and the ones that you're still trying to figure out. Hey friends, it's Blake with Birthing Babies. Welcome back to another week of our Birthing Babies for Birth Workers podcast. This week we are going to be talking about labor progress. We'll be talking about it in two different ways. One, we're going to look at what do I teach parents? How am I teaching labor progress? What does that look like in the classroom? And then after we've gone over that, we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into the research around labor progress, what it was and what it is now, what the current recommendations are. This is coming from ACOG, which is the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. So it does have a little bit of US centricity to it. I apologize for those who may be listening internationally and encourage you to look at what your professional organizations are recommending. But the research here is international research and does look pretty good. So these may be good standards for you to follow as well. So when we look at labor progress, we're looking at a multitude of different areas. We're looking at the stages of labor. We're looking at the phases of labor. We're looking at, so we're going to talk a little bit about the 5 P's of labor, what that means. We're looking at what's happening with the cervix, how that's changing. We're looking at the timing that's going into it. Once we get into the data and the statistics of everything, that's when we're going to start looking at what is the science behind the time based on the surveys that have been done and the research that has been done. So let's jump in and just talk about how are we measuring the stages and phases of labor. The stages of labor are the 4 stages that look at the dilation stage or the labor process. Then we move into the pushing stage, which is where you are actively pushing the baby out of your body. After that is the delivery of the placenta. And then after that is the 4th stage of labor, which is bonding, and that lasts for the 3 months postpartum, or maybe 18 years, right? We're going to take a deep dive into looking at the dilation stage. So we're not going to talk a lot about pushing today. We're going to talk about everything that gets us up to the point of pushing that. When I teach phases of labor, I teach early, active, and transition. And then I even go a step further and break early into 2 different categories. So I say there's early, and late early. So early labor, you can go about your life and get things done. You could maybe work, you could maybe sleep, you can definitely eat, you can talk through your contractions, everything is great. For a lot of people, especially second time or subsequent pregnancies, this is going to be something that happens in the weeks leading up to labor. So labor hasn't officially begun. For most first-time parents, this is going to be an onset of, okay, now I'm noticing my contractions, but I can still do life through them. Once we get to that late early phase is when we need to pause. Right? So these are uncomfortable contractions that we're having, and we need to pause and catch our breath, or maybe we zone out a little bit during the peak of the contraction. If you were having a conversation, maybe your train of thought just got derailed, or maybe you just need to take a slow breath to get through this part of labor. And then once we get to the active part of labor is when we're working really hard. Right? So active labor is usually defined as 6 centimeters. So early labor is up until 6 centimeters. Active labor is 6 to 8 centimeters. And then transition, which is kind of the fast and furious portion of labor. I always say this is the Hollywood birth. This is when things are pretty tricky. You're working really hard to stay on top of the contractions. That's the transition phase. And that's when you're going to go from 8 to 10 centimeters. When we're looking in medical journals and things like that, there are only 2 actual portions of this labor progress dilation stage. And that's going to be the latent and then the active. The latent means that labor is coming, but we don't know in what category that's going to be happening. And then active, we're going to look at how that's been redefined over the years. And so active is, okay, now labor is definitely underway. There will be a baby at some point in the near future. Some educators like to teach the 5 P's of labor progress. So there's the passenger, the passageway, the power, the position, and the psyche. So when we look at the passenger, we're looking at what is going on with baby. What position are they in? Are they head down? Is their chin tucked? Is the crown of their head well aligned with the cervix? Are they facing up? Are they facing back? What is their positioning? What is the passenger doing to aid this birth process? We're also going to look at the passageway. So that would be the pelvis. If we think of the pelvis as kind of like a heart shape, you can imagine that there are very different ways to draw a heart. Some of them are a little smushed, some of them are elongated. And so the shape of the pelvis will have an impact on the birth process itself. So the size of the pelvis and the shape of the pelvis will have an impact. Your pelvis is designed to flex. There are joints within your pelvis to flex and help baby move through. And baby's head's designed to mold so that it will fit through the pelvis. But the pelvis is an important player in that labor progress. The next one we're going to look at is the power associated with each contraction. Power would be the strength of the contractions. Are these contractions increasing in intensity? Is the intensity sufficient to move a baby through the pelvis? Those are the questions that we're going to ask when we're evaluating this labor progress. Positions, what type of positions is the laboring person in? Could they be in upright positions that are going to allow gravity to work with the baby and the pelvis? Are they laying down? Perhaps we need baby to reposition, and we're going to use things where the butt is higher than the baby so that the baby can back out of the pelvis and rotate or tuck their chin or do whatever they need. We're going to look at, lunges to change the shape of the pelvis dramatically. We're going to look at all of these different areas to try to figure out how are we going to use maternal positioning or the position of the pregnant person to aid this labor progress. Finally, we're going to look at psyche. There's not a lot on the research of what does that mean by psyche. I'm going to say what it means to me, and I apologize if this is not correct. So there are two different psyches that we are measuring when we look at psyche. I would say the first one and the most important one is how is the laboring person doing? Are they okay? The labor process is a painful process. It's a difficult process for many people, but are they okay with that pain or are they suffering through that pain? So pain in and of itself is not something that we should be afraid of. Do all sorts of different things. There are different pains associated with that. So wearing fancy shoes, working out, getting our hair done, all of those things can be associated with discomfort or pain, but they shouldn't cause any suffering. And so I believe that when the suffering comes in, then something needs to change in that labor progress. There is a hormonal response associated with suffering or not managing pain well. So when your body thinks that you are in danger, it's going to produce catecholamines. Those catecholamines are going to suppress the oxytocin and the beta endorphins that are working for labor. When we have a lot of suffering or really struggling psychologically with the labor process, you can oftentimes see a slowdown in the productivity of the contractions. So it's important to maintain a good headspace. When we look at psyche from another angle, so I said I was going to do two. The other one is, how are you doing through the labor process? Are you managing this well? What are your spirits like in between the contractions? So sometimes the contractions can be difficult, but oftentimes once we hit that active labor phase, we see a change in mannerisms between contractions. And so maybe you're telling jokes, you're laughing, you're having a great time in that late early phase. The contractions hurt, you're not talking through them anymore. But as soon as the contraction's over, you return to your baseline with little difficulty at all. Once you hit that active phase, I find that it is more difficult to return to that baseline of, I'm good, probably not laughing, probably not telling jokes. You hopefully will return to that baseline, but it's an effort to return to that baseline of feeling good in between contractions. So those are what I would say when we're looking at psyche. So how are you doing and how is your recovery time? Ideally, if you can joke through the entire labor process, I would love that. That would make me so happy. But this is something difficult, right? So when we gauge level of exertion with workouts, we know that if you are talking while you're running, you could probably be running a little bit faster. If you're talking while you are contracting, you probably need to contract a little bit harder in order to move the baby through the pelvis. We're going to talk about next, we're going to come up with what is happening inside of the cervix or within the pelvis to help the baby move through the pelvis. So there's four more main areas, and I'm going to expand upon them a little bit. Is the changes that are happening are the softening of the cervix, the dilation of the cervix, effacement, and station. What do those mean? So when you are pregnant, your cervix is harder, so it would feel more like touching the end of your nose. So if you were to touch your cervix, it would feel like the end of your nose. Ideally in labor, we want that cervix to soften to be about the consistency of the tissue on the outside of your cheek. So we've got some softening that happens. You can imagine that the tissue on the cheek is going to expand and open much easier than the tissue on the nose, right? So that's got some hardness to it. Next, we're going to look at the actual opening. So dilation for the research portion of this podcast, dilation is going to be the main indicator, but I do want to emphasize that especially with first-time parents, oftentimes there's a lot of things going on and they don't always happen in a linear fashion. So I always teach the multiple areas of labor progress here. So the dilation is the opening of the cervix. It's measured in centimeters. A centimeter is approximately a finger width. And you're going to dilate from 0 centimeters, meaning that there is no opening in the cervix, to 10 centimeters, which is about the size of a bagel. So there is going to be opening, and that is measured manually during a vaginal exam. So all of these data points are collected through vaginal exams, which is another topic for another day, but that is how they are collecting these tools. The next one we're going to look at is effacement. So when you are pregnant, your cervix is approximately 1.5 inches in thickness. As you become more dilated, that starts to thin out. Oftentimes your cervix gets softer, the muscles, the fundus is building, the muscles pull up as they shorten with each contraction, and so that cervix starts to be thinner and thinner. It starts at 1.5 inches. If your cervix is about 1 inch long, now you're going to be about 30% effaced. If your cervix is 1/2 inch long, now you're going to be 70% effaced. If your cervix is as thin as a sheet of paper, some people will call that anywhere from 95 to 100% effaced. And so it's really just how thin has your cervix gotten from a standard starting point. The final thing we're going to look at for labor progress is where is baby in the pelvis? There are two bony landmarks in your pelvis called the ischial spines, and those align with the cervical opening. When baby's head descends into the pelvis, it usually starts at -3 or -4, and then as contractions continue to push baby down into the pelvis, baby will move. Once the head is even with the ischial spines, it will be at 0 station, and then once the baby moves through the ischial spines, they will become positive stationed. So you're going to start off in the negative, usually around -4, which means you probably can't touch the baby's head. -3, -2 is where you can touch the baby's head. And then baby will just steadily come down through the pelvis until they reach that 0 station and then continue into a positive station. Once the baby is at +3, you can probably start seeing the head. So baby is very close to being delivered at that point. So those are the 4 areas that are going on, 4 things that are happening within the cervix and within the pelvis to measure what is happening. Are changes happening? I like these because sometimes dilation isn't happening, but everything else is. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what those timelines might look like. And it can be really defeating, especially if you've already arrived to the hospital and you want there to be some type of dilation or labor progress. It feels like you're doing a lot of work and you want credit for the work that you've done. Looking at these 4 different areas is going to help validate the work that you've done in a lot of ways. So unfortunately, they are not all accounted for in the research, but they are progress. So when we talk about the research, I want to start by defining what is nulliparous and what is multiparous, because I'm going to use those words a lot. Nulliparous means that it is your first time delivering a baby. So this is a first pregnancy, first baby. Multiparous is going to be when any subsequent pregnancy, right, or delivery. When we look at the timing for this, for a very long time we used what was called Friedman's curve, which was based on data that was published in 1954. and it anticipated how long it was going to take to move through the labor progress. One of the things that we found is that when we were using this older data, we noticed that the cesarean rates were increasing for failure to progress, but it was based on data that may not have been appropriate for the population. In 2010, Young curve was created, and this was using a larger sample size, and it created some new recommendations that we're now seeing in practice today. Just some of the things where we were. Friedman's curve said the latent phase of labor, which was that early phase of labor, usually lasted 14 to 20 hours. They considered 4 centimeters to be active labor. And then for first-time parents, so nulliparous parents, the assumption was that after 4 centimeters, you were seeing 1.2 centimeters of dilation every hour. When we look at the Young curve, the latent phase of labor has a much wider range. So what is considered normal is much more vast. It also says that most people start to follow trends when they hit the 6 centimeter marks. So the recommendation following this was to create 6 centimeters dilation as the active phase. Up until 6 centimeters, it is completely and totally normal to see less than 1 centimeter of change per hour. Once you hit 6 centimeters with the Young curve, most nulliparous people, this is going to be the majority, but not everybody, and this doesn't mean normal. It just means what is the average for most people. We're going to start at this point seeing 0.5 to 0.7 centimeters per hour. And for multiparous birthing people, we are going to see 0.5 to 1.3 centimeters per hour. Basically, what this is saying is that we want to see at least 1 centimeter of change every 2 hours, right? For subsequent pregnancies, it can happen significantly faster. It is not outside of the realm of normal for it to take the same amount of time. Another interesting part of this study was that while 6 centimeters is now the active phase of labor, it's not uncommon. So they say rapid change may occur between 4 to 6 centimeters. So just because a person is 4 centimeters does not mean that they will not progress quickly from that point. It just means that it is less likely for them to. So this is still in that range of normal. Young curve also included data on the length of pushing, which I thought was interesting. So I said at the beginning that we weren't going to talk a lot about pushing, but because this is interesting, I figured I might as well share. For nulliparous birthing people, it compared it with epidurals versus without. So with an epidural, first-time pregnancy, pushing phases can last 3.6 hours. Without an epidural, it's 2.8 hours for first-time parents. For people who have had a baby already, so this would be second, third, or subsequent delivery, with an epidural, the pushing phase typically lasts 1.6 to 2 hours, and without an epidural, it's 1.1 to 1.3 hours. So I thought that was interesting since this isn't something that was studied under Friedman's curve previously, that they included this. And I do like this one last part that I'm going to add in is that there was a consortium on safe labor norms. And what they said is for both nulliparous and multips, so no matter how many pregnancies and births you've had, 6+ hours should be considered normal, within the normal range, to dilate from 4 to 5 centimeters, and 3+ hours should be considered safe for that 5 to 6 centimeter mark. Once you're past that 6 centimeter mark, so into that active phase of labor, then we would like to see a baby in less than 16 hours. So that is going to be the practice norm. So you can see how things have changed very drastically and how we've increased the range of normal. So what I want to do, just to finish this up, is talk about what is normal in labor. I get questions on, is it normal for this to happen? Is it normal for that to happen? And I always like to bring it back to, I don't know what is normal for your body. And I don't know what is normal for your baby. This is the only time that this baby will ever be born. This is the only time that you and this baby will work together for birth. We don't know what the baby knows. We don't know what positioning looks like. When we talk about the norm or the averages, it's more than the average. So it's about 95% of people fall into the categories that I outlined. But there's another 5% that falls outside of that. And that can still be normal for their body. And so I think it's really important if we are presenting this type of data in our classes, that we're also presenting that this is the first time you've had a baby, or at least the only time you're going to have this baby. And so it's impossible to know what is normal. And the important thing is to make sure that everybody is healthy. So looking at other metrics, there is data to support that prolonged dilation stages do lead to adverse outcomes. And so there are guidelines in place to help make sure that babies are coming in a timely manner. But there's also going to be the human aspect of it. There's that 5% that falls outside of this range that is also having a very normal, healthy birth. And so it's important to have a care team that is going to look at individuals and individual cases in that scenario to help make the best recommendations they can. So thank you guys. I hope this wasn't too long. This was much longer than our standard podcast times, but I hope you enjoyed a little deep dive on labor progress and what that looks like. If you're looking for more information and deep dives on information related to birthing topics, please check out my online childbirth educator trainings. They can be found at teachlamaze.com. I have a Lamaze accredited childbirth educator program. I'm also teaching parents, working as a birth doula, working as a yoga teacher and a prenatal yoga teacher, and living my best life. Thanks, guys. See you next week.